Take a look at this.
If you were a bum without a blanket, if you had left your wife and kids when you went west for a job and had never located them since, if your job had never kept you long enough in place to qualify you to vote, if you slept in a lousy, sour bunkhouse and ate food just as rotten as they could give you and get by with it, if deputy sheriffs shot your cooking cans full of holes and spilled your grub on the ground, if your wages were lowered on you when the bosses thought they had you down, if every person who represented law and order in the nation beat you up, railroaded you to jail, and the good Christian people cheered and told them to go to it, how in the hell do you expect a man to be patriotic? This war is a businessman's war, and we don't see why we should go out and get shot in order to save the lovely state of affairs which we now enjoy.
Viggo Mortensen, and he's reading the words of a labor person, IWW man.
IWW, International Workers of the World?
That's right, and they refused to go along with World War I, and he's explaining why they won't. And basically he's speaking to poor people in all wars. He's saying it's a businessman's war, and war is a businessman's war. It always is. And so the people, the ordinary guys, well, like in Viggo Mortensen portrays here, ordinary guys have nothing to gain from this war.
So how do you explain the absence of protest in the streets today, the passivity in response to the fact that we have now double the number of troops in Afghanistan that George W. Bush had? How do you explain the apathy?
Let's put it this way. I don't think people are apathetic about it. I believe most people in this country do not want us to be in Afghanistan. But they're not doing anything about it. You're right. We're not seeing protests in the street. And I think one of the reasons is that the media, the major media, television and newspapers, they have not played their role in educating the public about what is going on.
There was a poll late this week showing that a bare majority of Americans do support sending more troops to Afghanistan. How do you read that?
And you have to remember this, that it is not easy for people to oppose sending troops to Afghanistan, especially once they have been sent, and once a decision has been made. It's not easy for people to oppose what the president is saying and what the media are saying, what both major parties are working for. And so the very fact that even close to a majority of the people are opposed to sending troops to Afghanistan tells me that many more people are opposed. So I have a fundamental faith in the basic decency and even, yes, the wisdom of people once they make their way through the deceptions that are thrown at them. And we've seen this historically. People learn.
I was struck in your special by what the labor leader, Cesar Chavez, had to say about organizing his fellow farm workers.
I'm not very different from anyone else who has ever tried to accomplish something with his life. My motivation comes from watching what my mother and father went through when I was growing up, from what we experienced as migrant farm workers in California. It grew from anger and rage, emotions I felt 40 years ago when people of my color were denied the right to see a movie or eat at a restaurant in many parts of California. It grew from the frustration and humiliation I felt as a boy who couldn't understand how the growers could abuse and exploit farm workers when there were so many of us and so few of them. I began to realize what other minority people had discovered, that the only answer, the only hope, was in organizing. Like the other immigrant groups, the day will come when we win the economic and political rewards which are in keeping with our numbers in society. The day will come when the politicians do the right thing by our people out of political necessity and not out of charity or idealism. That day may not come this year. That day may not come during this decade, but it will come.
It will come. Martin Espada as Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, a great poet.
Do you believe that it will come?
I do. I can't give you a date. But I have confidence in the future. You know why? Farm workers were, at one point, in as helpless a position as the labor movement is today. But as Cesar Chavez said, we learned that you have to organize. And it takes time, it takes patience, it takes persistence. I mean, think of how long black people in the South waited.
300 years.
Yeah, long.
And then 100 years after the Civil War, which was fought to free
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, well, I don't think we'll have to wait 100 years.
So populism isn't really, and people's power isn't really a left or right issue, is it? It's more us versus them, bottom versus top.
It's democracy. You know, democracy doesn't come from the top, it comes from the bottom. Democracy is not what governments do, it's what people do. And too often, you know, we go to junior high school and they sort of teach us democracy as the three branches of government. You know, it's not the three branches of government.
I'd like to end with a woman who showed us the power of a single voice, speaking for democracy. Born into slavery, largely uneducated, she spoke out for the rights of all people who didn't have any. I mean, she was an unforgettable truth teller, as you know. And here is Kerry Washington as Sojourner Truth.
That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? That man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And they ask him to do it. The men better let him.
Why did you include that one?
Well, we include that one because it's so empowering. And because, I mean, here was this woman who was a slave, you know, and oppressed on all sides, and she's defiant. And so she represents the voice of people who have been overlooked, and she represents a voice which is rebellious and troublesome to the powers that be.
Well, I will be watching the History Channel Sunday evening with your book in my lap, Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Bill.
That's it for the Journal. Go to our website at pbs.org and click on Bill Moyers' Journal. You will find out more about historian Howard Zinn and read a selection of his writings. There's also a web-exclusive essay on landmines and Barack Obama's Nobel Prize. That's all at pbs.org. I'm Bill Moyers, and I'll see you next time.